Hello and welcome to DS Tech Stuff. I'm your host Solomon and he's
Dad.
Today we have the Asus Prime X370 Pro motherboard, the Micron 1100 M.2 flash SSD and the Toshiba 2TB hard disk drive. But first,
as stated in the last video, the Ryzen 2700X, click on the information card to take you to that video. These videos are a series of videos on reviewing the parts we bought so Solomon can build his own desktop PC. Now, with prices all over the place in the past year, especially the GPU and RAM market, money had to be spent carefully. Now Solomon chipped in. Hey, chipped in. Did you get it?
what?
Chips?
Chip.
Microchips? No, forget it. Solomon put in 50% of the cost of the build, and we still can't work out what 50% he owns. Maybe the keyboard and the mouse.
No, I didn't pay for that.
The total cost of the build was $1,400 US, but we live in Taiwan, so currency conversion may differ. Now the cost also includes the monitor, so for me the desktop build isn't complete without a monitor, so he got a 27-inch Asus monitor as part of the cost build. Lucky you.
Can we just get on with it?
Oh, so impatient, aren't you, children? Anyway, you've probably heard now that a new series of B450 motherboards have or are still coming out, but they weren't on the market when we purchased this X370. And it's been really interesting when purchasing the parts, as we as a family live in Taiwan about 2 hours on the high-speed train from Taipei. So the costing has been, what you can say, head-scratching at times, trying to get the best deals. Now, as an example, the Ryzen 2700X cost us 10,300 NT, which is about 336 US dollars. The Asus Prime X370 Pro motherboard, we paid 3,990 NT, which is about 130 US. But at the moment on Amazon is 150. It's horses for courses. Also, the Asus X370 Strix is $173 and the Asus X470 Pro is $155. The question is, at what point do you cap the prices before you start purchasing the other parts? Anyway, let's take a look in the box of the Asus Prime X370 Pro motherboard and see what's inside.
Inside the box we have the Asus Prime X370 Pro motherboard. Next we have a little bit of cardboard, but don't worry about that. Always recycle the cardboard that comes with the package. Next we have the user manual. Very detailed, very good. Next we have the Q shield that clips onto the back of your PC case. Not one, not two, but 4 serial ATA 6 gigabits per second cables. The M.2 screw package to screw your M.2 drive in place. The one SLI high bandwidth bridge 2-way mount. One Q connector. One DVD with all the drivers on it. And the coupon code that gives you 20% off your cable mods. Now, I mentioned the DVD has all the drivers, but really the DVD is useless, as you should always, once the build is up and running, go to Asus's website and download the very latest drivers, or even better, do it before the build. Get everything downloaded onto the USB and have them ready when you first switch on. The DVD is only good for a quick game of Frisbee.
Oh, so when are we going to have a game?
Later.
Awesome. Now, one of the first updates should be your BIOS, which we will show you on the build video. We chose the Asus Prime X370 Pro as it gives a good balance between the X350 and the X470 Pro. In fact, the cost difference between the X350 and the X370 was only $10 US. No idea why, so that was a no-brainer. And the cost difference between the X370 and the X470 Pro was about $60 US, but the difference in specs is marginal. Yes, the X470 supports higher memory bandwidth and more stable with overclocked RAM, and the X470 has Store MI, but in the last video we mentioned if you use that, it can use 2 GB of system RAM to run. You better have enough RAM installed. So let's take a closer look at the specs of the Asus Prime X370 Pro motherboard. 1 AM4 CPU socket, 4 dual channel DIMM slots, maximum 64 gigabytes of memory, frequency up to 3200. Now my son's going to have 16 gigs of memory of 2 sticks of 8 gigs. Now if you've only got 2 sticks, always use the grey slots first. If you've got 4 sticks, then you'll use all 4. But if you've got 2 sticks, use the grey ones first. First stick here, second stick here. On the expansion slots, or Peripheral Connect Interface, PCI for short, we have 2 PCI Express slots, 3.0, 2.0 by 16 slots. And these 2 have been reinforced. You can connect one single GPU card and get the full 16 data lanes here, or you can connect 2 GPU cards and get 8 data lanes each, which is what the CPU will allow. Now the 16 data lanes allows up to 4 gigabytes per second of peak bandwidth performance per direction and up to 8 gigabytes per second of concurrent bandwidth. And if you have one GPU here or you have 2 GPUs, the performance difference between the 2 is very slim. Now the board will allow two-way SLI or Crossfire multi-GPU support. Here we have one PCI Express 2.0 by 16 slot, which is the last long slot, and we have these 3 small ones, 3 PCI Express 2.0 by 1 slots. Now these small expansion slots, these are good for increasing the number of expansion slots or expansion ports on your PC. So if you're running out of SATA ports or you're running out of USBs, then you can buy an expansion card and put them on here. Interesting to note is that you can place any expansion card by 16 or less in a PCIe by 16 slot. So if you have a GPU in slot 1, which is by 16, and you have all your by 1 slots filled, you still need another expansion card, then you can add a by 1, a by 4 or a by 8 card to a by 16 slot. It's all compatible. Above the first PCI Express is a 32 gigabit per second M.2 by 4 dual mode slot. Now there's plenty of bandwidth and it's above the GPU, which many people like as it means the M.2 drive will run much cooler than if it was placed under the GPU. And this slot will allow up to 11 centimeter modules, and the module I have has no heatsink, so it should be quite advantageous. Here we have the X370 chipset under its own silver heatsink. Now this allows you to tweak and overclock your system to get the best out of it. This is the chip which supports multi-GPU functionality, AMD's Crossfire or CFX and NVIDIA's SLI. At the top we have a 10 phase or 6 plus 4 phase configuration, Digi plus VRM and EPU or Energy Processing Unit. It's very impressive. It provides a total system power management by detecting current PC loadings and intelligently moderates power in real time. It automatically provides the most appropriate power usage for the CPU, the VGA card, hard drives and CPU chassis fans, helping to save power and money. So as an example, it takes the 12 volts supplied by the regular power supply and converts it to the required voltage to the CPU needs in the region of 1.3 to 1.45 volts for safe stock and overclocking requirements. This is where a good quality power supply or PSU comes into its own. Don't cheap out on that. Digi is Asus's set of controllers for digital voltage regular modules, the VRM, and DRAM, Dynamic Random Access Memory Voltage, a memory chip, which is here, that depends upon a given voltage to help keep stored data. The Digi and VRMs allow very precise memory and voltage tuning for optimal system efficiency, stability and performance. An interesting note, Intel moved part of Haswell's VRM architecture onto the CPU, and this is part of the reason why Haswell runs hotter than Ivy Bridge, just a side note. So remember, VRMs supply voltage to the CPU. The more you have, the less heat you generate, and the more stable your system will be, especially if you really want to overclock. Quality VRMs is important. If you have found a motherboard you like, check out the VRMs. I'll post a few links to the forums which discuss VRMs in detail. Now my personal advice is VRMs have a quality assurance tagged to them running under normal conditions. Now once you start to overclock, then you're running the VRMs at a hotter temperature, and so lifespan can be reduced, slowly and in some cases drastically. Stay away from the B350 boards, and if you want to start, then the Prime X370 is a good one to start with. It's not the best, but it's a good start. The much higher end boards, such as the Gigabyte Aorus GAA X370 Gaming, is rock solid. Make sure you get advice and do your research first. Also, there are high quality capacitors and chokes, and two huge power circuitry silver heatsinks. A good place to start when you're looking at power phases on a motherboard is the more the better in layman terms, because the load on each phase is reduced. So if you have 6 plus 4, then there'll be less load on them than if you had 4 plus 2. It all means the more you have, less heat is generated and the better power distribution you get. At the top we have an 8-pin 12V ATX power connector. This gives you additional power to the CPU. To the right we have two CPU fan header connectors. One CPU and one CPU optional connector. Here is where you will plug your fan which comes with your CPU. On this system it is the Wraith Prism. Here we have the standard 24-pin ATX power connector. Here we have the USB 3.1 connector, which can carry a whopping transfer speed of 10 gigabits per second. Now this will connect to your USB 3.1 connector on the front of your case. Next to the X370 chipset we have 8 SATA 6 gigabits per second ports, all from the X370 chip and RAID. Support is RAID 0, 1 and 10. Now these 8 SATA ports will be plenty for Solomon. If you want RAID 0 needs a minimum of 2 disks. It has excellent performance, no redundancy, but don't use this for any critical systems. RAID 1 needs a minimum of 2 disks, good performance, excellent redundancy as blocks are mirrored. And RAID 10 needs a minimum of 4 disks, excellent redundancy as blocks are mirrored, excellent performance as blocks are stripped. If you can afford the price, this is the best option for any critical applications, especially databases. At the bottom we have the system panel connector, where you connect all those pesky little connectors from the case, such as the ground, reset and plus 5V connector and the HDD LED connectors. Asus has come to the rescue as they provide you with their own Q connector. Add all the pesky little cables to this and then add the Q connector to the system panel. So this would simply connect to this with all those pesky little cables connected to this. We have 2 more fan headers. One is labelled water pump. Here, these two, we have the clear RTC RAM jumper, and this jumper allows you to clear the real-time clock or RTC in CMOS. But here we have a thermal sensor connector where you can plug a temperature sensor physically to this motherboard and access the readings via a motherboard utility. Now motherboard manufacturers usually provide software to view internal temperatures. Now Asus uses their own called the Asus PC Probe Suite. Another very good one is called Core Temp, and on my Asus Sabertooth R2 FX990 motherboard I use Open Hardware Monitor. Here we have a USB 3.0 connector, 20-pin connector for the front case USB 3.0 connectors. Here we have 2 USB 2.0 connectors. Here we have a TPM connector or Trusted Platform Module. And this is where a microcontroller will fit, and it can securely store artifacts used to authenticate your PC. Now these artifacts include passwords, certificates or encryption keys. Then use the BIOS advanced settings to set up the TPM. Here we have an old serial port connector, just in case, but USBs have surpassed this now. Then we have the front panel audio connectors, so if you have on the front of your desktop case audio jacks, then connect them up to this. Here we have Realtek's S1220A H-channel 7.1 HD audio codec chipset. And it has audio shielding and separate layers for left and right tracks. The right track goes here and the left track goes here. which means that both audio channels will deliver consistent equal quality of sound with premium Japanese made audio capacitors. There's Asus RGB lighting around the edging of the board, and we have 9 screw holes to screw down the motherboard, but do not screw down too tight, just a little pressure and that's it. Oh, and the motherboard is 12 inches by 9.6 inches. Here on the back we have a PS2 combo port, 1 mouse and 1 keyboard. We have 2 USB 3.0 Type A ports. We have a display port and we have a HDMI port 1.4B. And this supports 40 by 96 by 2160 at 25 Hz, 3840 by 2160 at 24, 25 and 30 Hz, and 1920 by 1080 at 120 Hz. We have a USB 3.0 Type A port and a USB 3.0 Type C port. We have 2 USB 3.1 Type A ports, generation 2, up to 10 gigabits per second of data transfer. Here we have Intel's LAN port, which was mentioned before, controlled by the i211 AT controller on the board. Also, we have 2 more USB 3.0 ports, so altogether 5 in total. And here we have 5 3.5mm audio jacks and 1 optical SPDIF or Sony Philips digital interface output port. Now if that's used, you want to feed stereo audio to an outboard digital to analog converter for better quality, rather than using your onboard audio. Now the SPDIF cable can carry up to 8 channels depending on the encoding signal. And there you have it, the Asus Prime X370 Pro motherboard in all its glory, ready to be installed and have a Ryzen 2700X CPU running the show. Now as for storage, we're going to install this thing, the Micron M.2 drive 512GB SSD, and also a Toshiba 2TB hard disk. Now you may not be too familiar with Micron, and this is the 1100 series M.2, 6 gigabits per second, and they are an international tech company producing many forms of semiconductors and produce many consumer products under the brand names of Crucial and Ballistics. And interestingly, Micron and Intel together created the IM Flash technologies, which produces NAND flash memory. So here I have the 1100 series, which is 512 gigabytes of M.2 drive, and this will hold the OSs. One will be Windows 10 and the other I think will have Linux Mint, because Solomon wants to learn Linux. Now the sequential read speed of this M.2 drive is 530 megabytes and write speed is 500 megabytes per second. Now compared to the Samsung Pro 850, where the read speed is 550 and the write speed is 520, and SanDisk Extreme Pro is 550 and the write speed is 520, the Micron is no slouch, and a lot less the price. It cost me in Taiwan $110 so my kit doesn't need the greatest and latest or fastest SSDs, and it's only 80mm by 22mm and has a 5-year warranty, and test benchmarks will come out after the build video. And if you're interested in the very deep specs, check out the links below to download the spec sheet on PDF.
When you're adding the Ryzen 2 CPU, make sure that the motherboard is compatible. The X470 is okay, but the X370s and the B350s may need BIOS upgrades, which leaves you with another problem. How to load the BIOS if the motherboard will not recognise the CPU? There are 3 ways. The first is to get the sellers to do the job for you, and if the seller is reputable, then they'll be glad to do it for you. All part of the customer service. Second is getting your hands on an older CPU, which will be recognised by the motherboard's old BIOS. AMD has had a service where they will lend you an older CPU. It's called a boot kit. It's free on loan and consists of an AMD AM4 A-series processor and thermal solution for short-term uses, so you can get the latest BIOS installed once you've done that. You can then swap out the boot kit and put in your new shiny Ryzen 2 CPU. then send the boot kit back to AMD. In fairness to AMD, it's not really their fault. The motherboard manufacturers were a little late on the updates, but as you watch this video, everything should be in place.
Yes, the third and final solution is the manufacturer can do the BIOS update. It was told that Asus would do the job for me as well as pay for all shipping to and from my house. Well, I like that, but thankfully the motherboard I have for the Ryzen 2700X is compatible out of the box. On the box it states Ryzen 2 compatible.
We've hoped you've enjoyed this video. If you have any comments, ideas, or just want to say hello, pop them down in the comment box down below. We'll read them all and the best comment will be pinned by us. Again, please help us by hitting the red subscribe button, hitting the notification bell so you'll get notified every time we post a video. It's been a real pleasure and a real learning curve for me. Thanks once again. Oh, I don't think Half-Life 2 will ever touch this PC. Bye!
Yes, it will.
No, it won't.
Bye.
Bye.